sometimes on certain websites you have to like set the time on the watch to a certain time so that they can verify that you have the watch, right? And it's just at random. And this guy couldn't figure out how to set the Sky-Dweller, so he wrote the time on a little post-it note next to the watch. Because it has this freaking ring comment thing, and it's kind of confusing if you've never done it. And it was just like, okay, well. And the watch is like unworn, and he bought it like 2 years ago, and I'm sure he had already forgotten how. So it's just on a pink post-it note, like 4:30, but the watch is like 10:45 or something like that.
Hey everyone, Ariel Adams here with aBlogtoWatch Weekly. Our brother Rick is once again not with us this week. You'll have to contend with myself hosting our news show. I hope you can handle that. Rick, wherever you are out there, which is probably home, we miss you. We want you back on behalf of Ripley and David and the rest of the crew. No more vacations for Rick. No, he's not on vacation.
But still.
We joke because he always wants to take the rest of the year off. He's like, do you think people want to listen? I was like, yes, this is especially when they want to listen. They need to feel the comfort of their watch hobby right in their ears. So that's what we're here to deliver. Yes, straight in your earlobes. Too bad we can't wear watches there. It's coming with the optical stuff. Look, when the smart glasses take over smartwatches, the wrist will be available again for useless things like mechanical timekeeping.
Oh, that's great.
So it's all going to come full circle.
Maybe it could AR, like augmented reality, like put whatever you want on it, like a Grandmaster chime or something like that. So you look down on your wrist through your stupid glasses or smart glasses, and then you will see whatever watch you want.
This could be making for some interesting spectating as people look and admire their wrist, which to you looks blank, but to them looks very, very different.
Like listening to it like Theory Stern, like, oh, okay, I can hear it.
Yes. In science fiction, you can look down at your wrist through augmented reality and see a watch that no one else can see but you. I mean, look, they already essentially do that for marketing purposes. Certain websites, you can do that to like see what a watch would look like, the size. I mean, I don't know all the brands that do it, but there's brands that use these AR tools to do so. That's not too much of a step further, but it's a different story when smartwatches are no longer the only game in town for wearables. And again, I just think it signals a time when wrist real estate will open back up again for, functional jewelry.
Yeah, and why just stop with the visual aspect of the digital watch that you see on your wrist? Why not have a minute repeater that looks like a Grandmaster chime, but instead it's Terry Stern just whispering in your ear, it's 3:45. Like, why are we limiting ourselves to gongs? If anything's possible in augmented reality, why not go full Jacob & Co. on it?
I mean, it opens up a whole market of human voice repeaters.
Yeah, I sort of want it to be a sonnery where it just comes on at random when you're not expecting it.
You remember the GPS craze where it was the celebrity voice telling you the directions? It's the same exact thing, but with watches.
Yeah, you can have Enya belt out the quarter hours at like 3:45 or something like that, entirely unannounced and unexpected. Yeah.
And now with AI, you don't even need the actual actor or actress. You can just steal it from them. So somebody needs to create a smartwatch face or engine or whatever you want to call it that is a minute repeater, but that has a human voice. Just say it out loud at the quarter or the hour. You should be able to choose. And then on top of that, you should choose the voice, not just standard voices, but throw in some celebrities there. I want Christopher Walken telling me what time it is every day, all day.
Oh my God. Yeah, that could be fun. I sort of just want to listen to 2.5 hertz on repeat, just like this. Always and forever.
Even though that has actually nothing to do with the digital timekeeper on your wrist. I got it. Yeah.
No, it's just like your inner earlobes have like whatever hertz you want, and basically it's just there to soothe, to give a rhythm to your day, basically.
We should call it This Watch Hurts.
Yeah, why don't they do that? Have an Apple Watch face that uses the little taptic thing to give you the 4 hertz. So you just have this subtle, almost imperceptible vibration of 4 hertz on your wrist to give you the full experience.
The great part of the conversation is everyone out there who listens, who designs mechanical watches is like, well, I can't do that, can't do that, can't do that.
Can't do that. Yeah, exactly.
It's hard to come up with inventions for mechanical watches because y'all got engineered new stuff and then make it work. We saw where that goes. It's not pretty.
It's,
Tiny mechanical bellows that whisper Christopher Walken's voice into your watch. That would be a very impressive feat. That definitely commands a six-figure price, in my opinion.
Well, look, speaking of digital, right now I'm wearing Tag Heuer's smartwatch, and they have their own software department, and they put, honestly, a lot of time and effort into watch faces and making them pretty and stuff like that. It's only a matter of time before sort of the Swiss luxury sensibility and the digital world are acceptable. I mean, they always joke about how they're the last to accept things. It's going to be like 2022 before they start like actually writing code on a regular basis there. They'll pick it up eventually, but then they'll make a whole crazy art form out of it, and they'll have the nicest digital watch faces from anyone. We're just all going to be dead when that happens.
I heard we were all going to live forever, but that's for another discussion.
Okay, so there's a purple watch on my screen here. Let's get into some watch reviews and things like that. It is, less than a month out, nearly 2 weeks away from New Year's, and on a daily basis, we're still seeing watches. So that is exciting. So let's just look through some of the recent articles. We have here the Venezianico Arsenale. I guess this is their integrated bracelet watch, except the lead picture here has, of course, the strap. I have some of the watches from Venezianico. I am proud that I'm able to say the name without stuttering or stopping. At this point, it took a lot of practice.
How much practice?
A lot of practice. $800. $800. I could go without.
That's pretty good.
Honestly, it's just the unnecessary case back art. We know that it's laser etched. It could be anything. There isn't an artisan. It's not bad. I'm just saying, like, it's not my favorite thing about the brand. I get what it's for. They're trying to go with the Italian theme here, and it's really Italian theme brand. But I think this is actually rather pretty, and I like watches like this that are meant for a mainstream audience. Obviously, it does come in other colors. Steel here. I'm trying to find the case dimensions. It looks like to be it's about 39 or 40. Have you guys seen it here? What the case dimensions are?
Not with you scrolling around.
Here we go.
40 millimeters.
Oh, 40 millimeter.
40 millimeters. Okay.
This is excellent value, isn't it?
Yeah. This is, again, you know what I like about this? I call it the uncle watch. I would be so happy to get an uncle this kind of watch. And that uncle, literally any uncle, would be happy with it. It's not necessarily the purple, but like, is this not a great uncle watch?
Not for my uncle, it isn't.
Really?
But maybe for some uncles, yes. I gave my uncle this Russian multi-time zone watch that Konstantin Chaikin designed. That was not made by Chaikin, but he designed it. It was like, I don't know what the brand was, but it was like this cool watch, and he really appreciated it. So that was like the watch for him, basically, which is very different to this.
And he is only allowed one watch. He can't fathom the idea of having multiple watches.
He genuinely can't. No, he's been wearing it all the time ever since.
Okay, so you're saying he would have to take one watch off to wear that other one?
Yeah.
I forget people like this exist. I thought it's like shoes. You take them off, you put other ones on.
I'm glad I could reintroduce this to your life, because there really are people who have just one watch. It's
okay,
true.
How about this? Let's narrow it down. Uncles who don't already have watches they're wearing every day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's much better. Yeah, exactly. It's a cool watch, though. I think it's also aimed at the watch enthusiast in the sense that it's very much, in line with the trends. And, if you want to be part of it and you've been, doom scrolling on Instagram, looking at freaking APs and Pateks and Rolexes for the last 8 years, seeing everyone rock those things, and Christopher Ward's and others, then, joining the trend. And there's, just so many options if you want to be this integrated quasi luxury sports watch person wearing this. But this was one of the better ones out there. If you look at the bracelet and how it's done, if you look at how thin the case is, you have this double bezel like on a freaking Cellini or something, where it's fluted or coin edged lower and then domed upper. I think it's a very elaborately made watch, irrespective of the style, for $800.
I think what impresses me the most is there's not a single element here I haven't seen before. I just haven't seen it in this exact combination. And they check. They're like, nope, no one's done it exactly this way. And that's impressive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and I think it's very approachable because they, other than putting their name in lieu of like a Swiss made type of signature below the 6 o'clock marker, it just has the logo. There's not a lot of text. Um, we're pretty accustomed to having the watch have the entire instruction manual and features printed on the dial, but I know a lot of people that aren't watch enthusiasts that would much prefer just kind of a clean face. And, that's as they say it to me. And if you look at stuff like the, Movado Museum watch, which has endured for the decades, that's about as minimalist as you get. So this is, I think, a nice way to sort of enjoy that Christopher Ward 12 style or like a PRX type of thing, but in a slightly, it's not the same watch everyone else has, like the PRX where, you go out to a mall for more than 5 minutes, you'll see one. And it's also, I think for enthusiasts, it's a good looking dial. It's got some interesting finishing techniques. But I think it's also very approachable for the average person where they're not wondering, what does 100 meters mean? Or why does it have to say automatic or something like that? I think I think it checks a lot of boxes and is very kind of versatile in terms of its appeal.
I'm looking at the different versions here on their website, and I think the most interesting one is the Ultra Black. It's funny how it's the least practical, but what is it about these relatively sparse dials that continues to attract our imagination? Because the other ones are definitely sparse, but then it's like has no markers at all and it's just black. It's like, oh, that looks interesting. Like, what is it about that look that captures our attention?
I think it's proportion. I think it really draws your eye to the interaction between the size of the dial and the size of the case. Once you start adding textures and indices and whatnot, then it's not a mess, but it's a distraction for sure. And this one, it's just like it really highlights the importance of the size of the dial. And this one is a dial heavy watch in the sense that sure, it's a busy case, but it's a very narrow bezel that is angled pretty heavily. So I think overall it's more of a proportionate thing. And because it's black, of course, it's like this endless void as well, which is very cool.
I think it's sort of one of those things like simple food items where, if it's done really nicely and it's a very simple dish, it's fantastic. But once you start adding additional ingredients, the likelihood of one of those flavors not appealing to someone increases. And so there's something kind of amazing when it's a really bare bones simple dish, but everything's executed nicely, or in this case, it's got nice proportions, good lines, good color palette, even if it is just black and the natural steel finish. But I think it's sort of that same thing where when simplicity is done really right, it can be more striking than an incredibly busy design, just because there's not a lot competing for your visual attention. So you're forced to focus on those really defining elements such as the case lines, the proportion of the hands, and all of that.
So that's the Venezianico Arsenale. See the review. Let's move on. Here's a watch that we saw earlier in the year, and we're just now sort of getting around to covering it because there's been so much. This is honestly a great watch. It's the Rolex Sky-Dweller, but it's a version of it that's in all yellow gold on the Jubilee bracelet with very sober white dial. Not a color that you might immediately want in a watch like this, like a white dial, but honestly, it works pretty well. They make an almost identical watch, I believe, with a matching gold tone dial, which is gold on gold on gold, which also looks good. I think the Sky-Dweller is still not a pretty watch. It's a good watch. It's a pretty case and a pretty bracelet. The dial just has never sold me on pretty. And I think what bothers me is the big open GMT window. I remember years ago we did a watch what if where we closed it and we just said, what if you could just see the little window here? I thought it looked a little bit better. But again, it's sort of because it has this annual calendar, because it has that command bezel where you turn the bezel to adjust certain things. It just, anything that's like not great about this watch sort of easily is masked by the cool things. It's a little bit bigger than a Datejust. It's kind of like, I know the Date is technically the bigger brother of the Datejust, but I feel like this watch is really the bigger brother of the Datejust in a lot of ways. So there's a lot of cool things here. Before I hear your opinions, let's just go over the price of this one. And I think this is, it's interesting. It's both high, but at the same time, you're like, oh, I thought at this point it would be more. $50,000 almost exactly for this solid yellow gold on Jubilee bracelet of the Rolex Sky-Dweller. This is the reference 336938. I think you pay more money for like an Audemars Piguet, in gold that has, a three-hand movement by a lot. This is a little bit more than your Nautilus and steel, right? And I'm just saying, if maybe that's the question I'll ask. If guys said this or a Nautilus and steel, what immediately jumps to mind that you'd want, and why?
I'll take this. I love the Sky-Dweller. I entirely agree. I don't think it's a particularly pretty watch, but I think it is like an important watch for Rolex because as it currently stands, the Datejust in its largest configuration is 41 mil. Same goes for the OP. And then the largest day date is 40 mil. They contracted it by a mil from the day date to the day date 40. So for a lot of people, 40 millimeters isn't a big watch. When it's crafted in solid gold or platinum and it's a Rolex, obviously has plenty of wrist presence. But I think the Sky-Dweller is important because it sort of takes the iconic Rolex design language and then levels it up to this bigger 42 mil case that's thicker, that doesn't just have like an additional day display like the day date. It's an annual calendar with the GMT. It's a tangibly more elaborate watch, and it looks the part too. So I think it's really compelling. And of course it's still a Rolex, so you get good water resistance and a very well considered package that's meant to see regular wear and use. But when you think about just the pure amount of gold that is in this watch relative to what you get from like a steel three-hand Nautilus or Royal Oak or something, and then you look at the complication that this is offering, it's kind of, you love the name of Patek or AP, but I think for just a watch you'd have to live with, this is just a much more compelling piece, and you get a fidget spinner on the bezel that links to the movement. It's just a cool watch, So as kind of basic as it sounds, I'd want the gold Sky-Dweller. It's just an incredible flex.
David?
It is a very powerful watch. It's true in terms of complication and execution. It's a bit too thick for me, and at some point, many years ago, I was contemplating getting one of these or aspiring to get one of these, and I realized it's just, my wrist is just too narrow for this. And even if it weren't, it's a lumpy watch in the sense that it's a very heavy watch head. It's a heavy movement inside a heavy case. So it just tends to wobble around on the Oyster and also on the Jubilee. Maybe not on the strap as it originally debuted, because it was, I think, a precious metal only on a strap at the time when it debuted many years ago. I love the movement. I like the this experiment, Ariel, that you mentioned, where we would close the dial, the sub dial, and it would lead to a relatively more straightforward dial. Overall, it's a watch I would love to own and I would love to wear, but it's just too heavy as it is for comfort. And I think, no matter how cool a watch is, if it's not absolutely superbly comfortable to wear, then I'm not interested anymore.
What do we think about the utility of the features? I mean, the time and the date, okay, annual calendar, I guess that adds something. The GMT, if this is the super Datejust, why? Does this help you do those extra things, or is this sort of what they were able to stick in there? I've never quite figured that out. Again, when I wore it, I liked those features, but I've never been someone to wear a watch day after day after day to be like, oh, an annual calendar is so much more convenient. Like my date is just always wrong.
Well, it happened once that my Grand Seiko Spring Drive screwed me over with the date, and I was on public transport, and I thought that my monthly pass was still valid, and it wasn't, because it was not the 31st, but it was the 1st, and I had to pay a fee, and that happened because my date didn't switch, and because I'm an idiot, but that's part of the reason why you get an annual calendar. So I think that's why, I would go for something like this, because it can actually genuinely be useful every once in a while. I would not stretch for a perpetual, because I heard this one guy who explained to me very passionately how the annual calendar is just the worst, and you have to stretch for the perpetual because that's the big flex and whatever. And I was like, it's just literally one evening, one time when it's more impressive than an annual calendar. It's ridiculous.
It's also just like one extra gear. They charge you $40,000 more for not that much more watch.
Well, and I don't know about you guys, but the point, I love the concept of a perpetual calendar, but it's utterly useless for someone who has multiple watches. You know, like the odds of me once every 4 years wearing my watch, my perpetual calendar consecutively. So on, February 1st, I can wake up and go, ha, yes, it did the thing. The chances I'm just going to have to reset like 8 different complications when I go to pick it up. So I've never I love the theory of a perpetual calendar, but I think the annual calendar gets you 99% of the way there. And, in my opinion, the Sky-Dweller itself is incredibly intuitive to use, since you don't need to like grab a dull pencil or something and prod the side of the case like you do with so many other annual calendar, perpetual calendar watches.
So we'll finish off the topic with this observation about annual calendars. I think that what we're hinting at is, if you really sort of look at it and you sort of weigh practicality and cost and things like that, annual calendar is definitely a step up over your standard calendar. You have to change often because you have to do it like every couple of years, provided it's running all the time. And it's not so complicated that brands feel that they have to charge perpetual calendar money. So it's a really good in between, and it's probably, if you're a calendar person, like the most practical of the calendar watches. But here's the rub. There's not that many in the market, and very few of them are pretty. There's a lot of very gorgeous perpetual calendar watches. They're so impractical, but they look fantastic. Okay, let's look at some of the annual calendars. There's some of the ones that Ludwig Oschlin does, which are super simple, but not, again, focused on beauty. There aren't a whole host of really pretty annual calendars. I don't know why.
Chronographs. There's the Carl F. Bucher one, the Heritage Bike Compacts. That is a pretty looking watch.
Yeah, but the annual calendar execution is not part of the prettiness. The prettiness has nothing to do with that part of it.
Yeah, that's true.
I guess it's look, a GMT, when people think about the attractive, it's built around that complication, the extra markers that are often on a bezel, the look of the extra hand or whatever. That's a huge part of it. Like with this watch, Rolex was able to put in, essentially 2 extra big complications, but they didn't add anything, they took away. So this is an exercise in removing as little as possible. Like, everyone likes to look at the date just. They want extra complexity. How can we do that without making it that much uglier? But they never said, how can we make it prettier? Right? They never built a attractive way of displaying this. Forget the GMT. Let's just focus on the annual calendar. This is a pretty good one, right? With it being just around, yeah. Does the GMT even need to be there? Maybe this would be a good watch without the GMT, right? Does that even need to be? So I think it begs a lot of questions about what is actually marketable and what would actually be pretty. But I think we all agree, we want attractive watches. It's really hard to sell a watch that's ugly even if it has a great story. A pretty watch needs like barely any story and will sell okay. So watch designers and movement engineers, maybe that's an unexploited territory, is, more emphasis on annual calendars. Any thoughts?
I think Rolex, just being Rolex, wanted to make this intentional. So they, look at the name Sky-Dweller as not quite as pretentious as Yachtmaster, but this is clearly a watch that they've deemed for like the jet setter, the wealthy jet setter. And, when it debuted, as David mentioned, it was, exclusively in solid gold, and you could get on a leather strap or a bracelet. But this is supposed to be like the end all jet setter watch. So it's supposed to look refined enough like a date just, so as not to scare folks that look too tactical like a GMT or a sports watch. We are refined after all. That's why it was originally offered on leather. But then at the same time, I could see the folks at Rolex sitting down and saying, well, okay, so what would the Sky-Dweller need? Well, they would need, obviously GMT functionality. They'll be going between zones, but yeah, you're often crossing the date lines on your jet setting travels to the Maldives. So maybe you need an annual calendar as well, as you don't have to keep futzing with that or worrying about that as much. But it should also, but I think Ariel makes a good point that if that's part of it, I think the aesthetic implementation of the GMT complication could have been done a lot better. It has always felt a little bit like an afterthought in this instance, but I think the feature set was aimed to be intentional, but I think that might have gotten in the way a little bit of just the visual presentation of it, which otherwise could be, quite elegant and restrained and still offer the same type of utility.
The reason that I pointed out that Venezianico, all black, ultra black, whatever they called it, dial, was to demonstrate how we make allowances. We forgive pretty things that are not that practical. Yet it's very difficult for even a highly functional, ugly thing to get our approval, right? So brands, if you use this logic, you're almost always better off making something pretty. If it's pretty and practical, boom, you've hit gold, right? But if it's ugly, I don't care how amazingly useful it is, unless you're solving like a health or energy problem, no one's going to get it.
I love browsing, websites to see prices and stuff, and I wanted to see, how the Sky-Dweller is doing in terms of resale. And I found this one in white gold from 2022. And, sometimes on certain websites, you have to like set the time on the watch to a certain, time so that they can verify that you have the watch, right? And it's just at random. And this guy couldn't figure out how to set the Sky-Dweller, so he wrote the time on a little post-it note next to the watch. Because it has this freaking ring comment thing, and it's kind of confusing if you've never done it. And it was just like, okay, well, and the watch is like unworn, and he bought it like 2 years ago, and I'm sure he had already forgotten how. So it's just on a pink post-it note, like 4:30, but the watch is like 10:45 or something like that. Oh, that's hilarious. I mean, this whole ring comment thing, if you walked up to anyone wearing a Yachtmaster 2 and told them, you have to set your countdown timer to 6 minutes and start it immediately, or else I will take your watch, they would not be able to do it. That's for sure. It's a bit convoluted to use, but it's the clickiness is just so satisfying. It's crazy.
Well, Sky-Dweller, we love you. Rolex, keep working on it. All right. Let's get to David's recent column article titled Grinding Gears, How Long Should Watch Brands Milk Historic Achievements? David, summary of what this essay is about.
Well, apparently, based on the comments, people say, as long as there's milk coming out of it. It's not how long they can, it's how long they should, It's I know that they will keep doing this for as long as they can. That was not the question. I can't make it any more clear than it is in the title, but whatever.
Hey, Jesus died like 2,000 years ago, so come on.
Yeah, and we're still on about it. But understandable. So, but still, this is like probably a stretch coming from like even the moon landing. Anyway,
these stories are barely maturing.
That's actually true. There's still people alive who saw it on TV. Great. But I wasn't alive when it happened, and that's probably, part of the premise of this article is that basically I would like for there to be luxury watches that I can go and buy and wear and just, think about that have accomplished something in my lifetime and not, 60 years ago. And so we see all these brands churning these watches out based on the same story that happened many years ago. As impressive as they were, I would just like for these brands to not stop doing these, but do something cool on the side as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think the thing is, like, some of them are trying, but the purpose of a watch just doesn't have the same functional thing. So, like, you think about the moon landing, it's like, what did the Omega Speedmasters do during that? They were in outer space on the surface of the moon. Okay, that's pretty rad. What are the new space watches doing? Well, we put a bunch in a suitcase and gave them to some rich dudes who went up in a jet for 5 minutes, and it broke it just doesn't have the same thing. And so, like, back when it was like we were figuring out how saturation diving worked and we had to drill holes in the side and make this thing called a helium escape valve, it's like, yeah, cool. And it's like, now it's like, what complications are there? It's like, it's an engineer at Apple thinking, I'm going to make like a sleep apnea detecting thing. Like, that is where we're at with like the forward thinking watches. So you have some brands like Richard Mille being like, okay, we're going to like strap it to Nadal and have him play tennis or whatever. But I think very cool, very cool. I think Richard Mille is a great example, but like, I completely agree. I think they need to create more opportunities rather than trying to shoehorn themselves into the opportunities of 50 years ago. It's not going to be the underwater tool. So give as many as you want to James Cameron. It's not going to like make that watch relevant, but instead, make a watch that can be doing cool modern stuff in some meaningful capacity. So you haven't just sent it up with some, foreign national billionaire to go ride the space station for the afternoon.
The way I look at it is quite reductionist, and it's people like watches that are on the wrists of people doing dangerous things. And apparently we had a lot more people doing dangerous things in dangerous situations. If you look at all the different things in one way or not, they're dangerous. Whether it's dangerous because your watch will break or dangerous because you will break, there's some type of danger in the situation, and we get excited about that. So really the solution is, how can watch brands put their products on people doing dangerous things? And maybe the perception of what dangerous things are has changed, and what's what's acceptable. Obviously there's a lot of controversy because one person's celebrated dangerous activity is villainized by someone else, and so we have very few dangerous things that everyone agrees is cool. Being a soldier, perfect analogy there, where some people glorify that, other people demonize that. Some of the safer things are not very sexy, like all these companies trying to get away from military stuff. They keep saying search and rescue for human assistance purposes, which, I'm sorry, just hasn't got anybody excited ever about a watch. It's great, but it's just not dangerous enough. We need a lot more. If you're like rescuing people while being shot at, maybe. But I have yet to be in a situation where someone like, that's the watch they made for medics. Like, people are like, oh, great, you got a pulsometer? Whoop-de-doo.
I mean, there's cool search and rescue stuff, but these brands are not really leaning into like presenting that side of it to us. I mean, if you were out on the sea, like rough seas in the middle of nowhere, hanging off a helicopter, I would be like, that's cool. I wonder what watch he's wearing. But, we don't see that.
The soldiers now aren't like, if only I had a better timekeeper for fighting. Like, they've got plenty of good watches. And a Casio G-Shock is hard to beat. No, not everyone's wearing it, as popular as it is. But, we got to get watches back in dangerous environments, or at least publicize it. They try, they're like, oh, someone's going to space. That's still kind of dangerous. Or they're driving really fast. They're jumping out of a plane. They're doing something. The brands definitely try, but we don't have people doing hand-to-hand combat. Even there, look at all the UFC stuff. The second they can wear watches in UFC, that's going to be a game changer. I don't think that's allowed yet, but that's coming next season, right?
Jacob & Co. is so excited at the prospect of that. Could you imagine two guys just fighting with astronomy is on?
Diamonds stuck in their face.
They look like that Bond villain from what was it, the Brosnan era, where like the thing went off and he had those diamonds stuck in his face.
Yes, but Bond watches do so well.
Oh yeah, exactly. Do a villain watch. I mean, Jaguar did pretty well with the villain cars.
If someone is about to die or actually dies wearing a watch, this is great for marketing purposes.
I'm not sure that I wouldn't quote you on that.
I'm just saying, it's practically true.
Practically, yes, but probably, there are other avenues that brands can explore first.
I'm not saying we should go out of our way to create these situations.
I wonder what's richer. This may be like, I'm not sure what is. Who has more money? Is it the Swatch Group or Red Bull?
Red Bull?
I'd say Red Bull, yeah.
Okay. Because Red Bull does these goofy races where people are jumping off, places, or, driving down in their home built,
which
carts
the
or whatever.
Swatch Group supports through ambassadorships and sponsorships. So just saying, they love each other.
Do they?
Yes. You remember Red Bull cliff diving sponsored by, who was it, Mito or something?
Really? Oh, good. So I guess I'm onto something. Or they are, rather. That's cool. Do it more. Do more of it. Seriously. You have to have,
was the romance behind it. It's a big difference to climb a mountain because you're bored, or if you're doing it for the glory of your king.
Well, yeah, but still, it's kind of funny. The Red Bull brand value, I don't care about that.
Remember, Tag Heuer sponsored some of their stuff for a long time, but it's Watch Group now.
Yeah, that's cool. Do it. Do more of it. It's pretty close, actually. Swatch Group revenues worldwide, 2021, 7.3 billion. Red Bull, 8 billion. So, $8 billion. So it's pretty close. That was a good question.
That was a good question.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, so what are some dangerous activities that brands can go out of their way to develop watches for? Again, they're trying. What are some of the missed areas? Where are people dying that the Swiss watch industry has not figured out about yet?
Just getting lightly injured.
Yeah, we've been talking about how the U.S. is poised to be an important market for watch brands, and nothing is more American than Black Friday, and nothing is more dangerous than shopping in person on Black Friday. So the Black Friday shopping timer would need to be the absolute most overbuilt, durable thing with maybe a parking meter timer and certainly shock protection to fend off the hordes trying to be the first to buy a cheap TV at a discount.
Is this still a thing though? The stampedes during Black Friday? I was just wondering.
I don't know. Out of morbid curiosity, this Black Friday, I went to go just see the scene at like the Citadel outlets, which are not too far from me. And
you just wanted a good deal on a DVD writer. That's it.
Oh, no. I don't think I went in. I didn't buy anything. I didn't go in anywhere. I was just shocked at the number of people where I'm looking at my phone going like, we can just buy this online and not deal with this queue of 40 people that wraps around just to get into the store to be disappointed by their inventory. So I guess it still happens for people who I don't use Google Shopping or whatever,
or internet. Yeah.
So
what did you see? Were there people pulling hair?
There weren't people pulling hair. There was a lot of shisty business trying to, jostle in line in the queue. There was some running. There was kind of the hoarding thing of people walking around in the store with like 5 of the same product, and it's like, you don't need that. Those aren't your size. I see the size XL on it, and you are my size. So, I guess it's still very much a thing. I think eating certain gas station food in America, also very dangerous. We can have like the food poison timer, a countdown of sorts.
I just had a hot dog out of a 7-Eleven. Start your timer. That's hilarious.
Well, all right, luxury watch brands. Have we seeded your imagination at all?
Probably not. That's okay. We try another day.
Okay. Well, David wants us to go past some of the past dangerous things, or maybe do them again. What if we just went to the moon the exact same way again, and we repeated it? How would that work out?
I think that would be interesting for one. I'd sort of want an Omega boutique on the moon, only selling moon watches. I think that
we
would
like
be
reboots.
Cool. Yeah. Just put the store on there.
That could be cool. I mean, although the unsold inventory from the moon located Omega boutique would come back and could be sold at the Earth boutiques as, official moon watches that had been spent time on the moon.
Do I need to pull up the April Fools on exactly that?
I was wondering if you would remember. Yes.
Okay. Let's.
Oh
see
my
here.
God.
I don't remember the names of these ones were.
Who finds it first? Omega watches return to moon for 50th anniversary.
Okay.
These are always so much fun. 2019. Oh my God.
That was the last Basel World.
The spirit of Apollo. That's hilarious. I miss those days.
There we go. Yeah. So in
Scroll down,
2019, I joked about how Omega and NASA partnered up to send back a lot of watches to the moon. All watches.
Every watch a moon watch. It's like a globe master on the moon.
Yes.
The Aqua Terra, neither of which are on the moon.
Ever.
So they would drop all these watches on the moon. It was a way of getting rid of inventory as well as being able to claim that all their watches are moon watches. So since the idea has come back, I just thought we would. There we go. Every watch, a moon watch.
I forgot that this was about making every Omega a moon watch now. That's positively hilarious. I mean, that's where the tongue was. I mean, that's where the whole thing was going at the time. It still is in a way, but in 2019, oh my God.
Yeah. So Maybe this is why they don't talk to us too much. I still stand by the joke.
It was really funny.
2019. If you want to see it, do we make it easy? We need to have a book at some point of all the April Fools. At some point, it'll be its own thing, right? And the article, if you want to see, Omega watches return to moon for 50th anniversary of Apollo 11 space launch. Okay,
or just Google April Fools aBlogtoWatch, and you're in for the ride. I mean, wow, that's a good one.
Just
read all of them.
Ironically, another moon story here. This is the red dial of the Bulova Lunar Pilot Blood Moon watch. This is basically their lunar pilot, which they tried to call the Moon Watch, but legally they couldn't. I think this is the smaller case. It's polished now. It's got this red dial. I think these are comfortable. I like that the case both looks highly utilitarian and a little bit weird at the same time. $895 with a high accuracy quartz movement. David, continue with your thoughts.
Every Bulova lunar pilot. That's what I want. When all of them go to the moon as well. It's a bit too large for my taste, but we have, of course, different needs in terms of case size and whatever. So
this is the smaller one. I really like it. This is the smaller one.
Oh my goodness, it's still large. But it's cool. I quite like it. I like the colorway. I like the concept. I like the movement. I like the story. I'm always happy when it's not just one brand owning some story or something like that. It's always, I think, for novice watch enthusiasts, it's also like an eye-opener. Like, oh, it's not just this brand who owns this stuff, or oh, it's not just this watch that went to the bottom of the ocean or whatever. I think it's cool that many watches do cool things and not just one brand gets to own the whole thing and capitalize on it.
Ripley, what do you think about this lunar pilot?
This one specifically reminds me of those like Speedmaster Racing, like the Schumacher ones they did years ago. As far as the colorways and the fact that it, this watch itself is kind of reminds me of the Speedmaster, both in theme and just kind of appearance when it's in its black colorway. But I like the Lunar Pilot a lot. I think it's an interesting offering. I think it's cool that they use a high accuracy quartz movement in there and kind of push the, they didn't just, it's not in any way the same watch that was used back in the origin of its Lunar Pilot story, but it's the modern version that they sell for under $1,000. We've seen plenty of versions in kind of the dark colorways of space, black, blue, gray. I think there's one with some gold bits on the black watch. But now I think it's cool to kind of see it play with some other colors, even if it's something kind of a bit of a stretch like a red moon. I do wish they made these smaller. I know they made a smaller size, but it went from being like 44 millimeters to like 42 millimeters or something like that. So I would have loved to see them just shrink it further, but I really like this just general collection. And I think it's cool to see it starting to branch out more, and maybe we'll see it start to take other forms.
The movement has limitations, and the smaller one honestly feels a lot more wearable. So there's only so small they can get it. Primarily because this high frequency quartz movement requires a pretty big battery. And that's really what it comes down to. So it's a bit of a trade-off, but honestly, I think they do a really good job of making it wearable. So I would encourage people that are concerned about the size to try one on. If you wore the original one, felt it was too big. I don't know that I agree it was too big, but it was definitely sizable. Ripley, I think you should revisit this one again, because again, I agree, for your wrists, and David, maybe because I know your preferences, it might have been big, but you should try this one out, especially since the lugs are very very short, and that makes a really big difference with this kind of stubby lugs. So,
yeah, and they've never been very thick. That is, I think, an important thing with the quartz movement as well. They may be confined by the diameter, but it's not a particularly thick watch. And one of the things we always discuss about unless you have a very expensive mechanical chronograph, they are kind of fundamentally thick movements when you use one of the generic, Valjoux ETA-based designs. So, I'd be curious to spend some time with one of the smaller ones and see how it wears. Because even the larger one didn't feel quite as big as its objectively sizable dimensions.
So here's a question. Bulova obviously has some very real history with this watch. You can look into it more. But the classic version of this watch went to the moon. It's an interesting kind of story behind it. It was actually sold at auction. It wasn't really supposed to be privately owned. It's an interesting story about how it got to auction, went for a bunch of money, like over $1 million. What does Bulova do now? Do they just keep making versions of this? Do they rest the story? So we made a few, reissues, because again, this was never really a commercial watch. That was what's interesting about it. Only recently was this lunar pilot ever, in the real sense, commercialized where the public could buy this design. That's my understanding. So do they focus on today's in fascination with space and make a new watch? I'm just wondering, because I think Omega does the vintage thing. I don't know that they'll ever be able to compete. Obviously, in price, the Bulova is way more affordable. Do they try to have their budget Speedmaster, or do they go in a more contemporary direction?
I'd like to see both. I think it'd be cool in the same way that the Speedmasters Omega has turned that into so many different things. I can't even begin to unpack that right now. It'd be cool to see this sort of blueprint adapted to other types of things. Keep talking about, its space lineage and all of that, and keep kind of making those heritage-ish models for people who appreciate that aspect and are priced out of the increasingly expensive Speedmaster. But it'd be cool for them to sort of use this pilot concept to sort of maybe alter the case a bit, make one more utilitarian, maybe partner with some Air Force thing, people, group, organization or something, and do like a more utilitarian pilot spec one. But I think that would be a way to sort of, further reinforce the legacy of this model, but also leaning into the fact that this is a very much a modern execution of that original design, rather than them trying to step back into that and recreate just a vintage heritage piece.
Yeah, thank you. Even if it is just a budget version of the Speedmaster, you do get a lot of watch for the money. It is conservative enough to wear for years. Maybe the red is not for everyone, but I think they have a nice watch here. But as Ripley said, they're definitely going to have to put a little bit more romance into the story and tell that a few more times. Let's look at this watch. This was quite a popular watch. This is the Hamilton PSR 74. Not a very big watch, but this brings back, I guess it's a modern LED, timepiece that you have to push the button there. Again, this one, I guess they're going to call it a unisex model. It's kind of a women's watch size, if you ask me. I mean, 31 millimeters wide, not very big, but still kind of neat. Talk a little bit about your feelings about the fashion or technical validity or fascination, between $745 and $845, depending on whether it's the standard brushed steel or PVD applied gold tone. David, thoughts?
How much is this?
So in gold, $845, gold tone, $845, $100 less with the steel tone.
I mean, it's a fun watch. I'm not sure I would shell out quite so much for it. I'm not sure how long before it would wear on me, or I would just be like, okay, well, I had this experience and now I'm ready to move on to the next one. If this rocks your boat, then that's great. That's awesome. I'm happy it exists. That's definitely true. I'm happy it's not just khaki automatics from Hamilton, but cool stuff like this. I appreciate the work that they have put into to making this and designing this and whatever. Looks probably, potentially comfortable. It's a little bit dear in terms of pricing, but other than that, it's a cool exercise. I'm not too interested in the design, but that's just subjective stuff.
So before I hear Ripley's thoughts on this, I want to talk a little bit about the display here. Just reading a little bit about the article here that Sean wrote. You have essentially two layers. There's apparently an LCD layer, and then there's an OLED layer, which sort of has a natural backlight to it, and that helps it sort of glow better. So you don't have the traditional LED, and the reason for that is you'd have to completely engineer new boards. You'd have to have a lot more parts. You'd have to do a whole thing. You know, both of you guys have seen the old LEDs and, and even the old LCDs and look cool. Are brands, should they try to re-engineer some of those parts? Because they actually look a little bit different. You can see the sort of strange workarounds they're doing with today's stuff to make it look like older stuff rather than remaking it. And you know, just Ripley, any thoughts on that?
The LED watches, it's a fun novelty, but for me, there's very much like a price ceiling as far as what I'd personally pay for one. I picked up like one of those Armatron LED watches from Amazon for like $20. Wore it a few times, gave it to a buddy who gave it to his kids. You know, and that's kind of, I like the novelty. I think it's a cool watch. I think it's nice that Hamilton makes these more elevated models for someone who likes the vibe of it, likes the appearance, but doesn't want, you know, to be confined to a $20 watch and the build quality that accompanies that. I think these are a great option, and I think the modern take of an LED screen that uses the two kind of superimposed displays is beneficial, because my least favorite thing about a classic LED watch is that it takes two hands to read the time. You actually have to press the button. You can't just glance at it. And it's not like an always on display. And so this way you kind of get it. Obviously it lights up brighter, but it looks like in the photos where it's not illuminated, you at least have a light rendering of the time on there. So I like it. Again, it's not where I'd put my money, but I think the number of digital watches with metal cases isn't all that high considering how many people like digital displays. So I think these are a unique offering for those who want that, but also just want a more elevated, user experience and product.
What other features can a watch like this have in it to make it more competitive? You know, at the time when these watches originally came out, the novelty was the display. The novelty was it being digital versus analog. Nowadays, none of that has novelty. Can these watches, especially at this price point, be more relevant if additional features were added into it? I'm just wondering.
I think so. I think Casio does a great job of this when they integrate Bluetooth. Like, look at the Casiotron, where it's aesthetically very similar. It's a modernized version of the original, but from a functional perspective, it's much more in line with like a contemporary G-Shock as far as the conveniences, the timekeeping, and all of that. It would be cool if you had this uber retro display, but via your phone and Bluetooth could tap into some other functions without having a super cumbersome interface, or, you know, change the mode so the buttons would change to a stopwatch or something like that, where, you know, you wouldn't need to memorize a cumbersome setting process, but you could actually take advantage of having effectively a circuit board in there and optimize it for some of those features, and, you know, the autonomy, maybe make it solar powered, all of that stuff.
Yeah, I think they should do a whole lot more. I think at this point this should be out of the question. It's sort of a disappointment at the time, but like I saw this. Jared Perrigo had the casket, and you know it would light up for like 2 or 3 seconds, and I was tempted to pull the trigger on it because it was such a cool case and cool concept, and I was like, well, if you use it more often, if we were to have the display light up for longer, then you would have to replace the battery more often and whatever. And I'm like, I wouldn't wear this every day. I don't care. I don't want to like have to press it and not be able to take a picture of my watch because the display goes off in like 3 seconds. You know, give me like a 10 or 15-second display, and I will just, you know, wear it like once a week or twice a week or something like that. So there are bottlenecks here and there in terms of technology, but at the same time, I also think that this should be a whole lot more fun in terms of functionality. They just should be, especially for $800 or whatever it is.
There's definitely a lot more that they can do with it. Now let's talk about another watch. We talked about the Venezianico Arsenale. Now the watch that it wants to be, the
Same hands.
The Parmigiani Fleurier Tonda PF Micro Rotor. I guess it actually has no date. Is that part of the actual name? Maybe it is.
That's hilarious.
This, you know, the PF just stands for Parmigiani Fleurier, and it says that because it has it on the name. So that's actually part of the name of the watch, though that's actually on the watch. You know, you had that other watch that was like $800 or something like that, $900, and you have this one, which of course
it's a gazillion million.
$25,300. Look, the Parmigiani is going to be finer in every every subjective and objective, maybe not every subjective, but every objective way, right? It's going to be better, materials, better finished, in-house micro rotor movement, stuff like that. But I wonder what this looks like to a consumer on the outside. It's a very interesting sort of dynamic, especially from an ecosystem. Brands like Parmigiani have to have a certain price point, and they come out with something like this. Then a fashion brand comes out with a similar looking product at a lot less. The fashion brand isn't going to sell that watch without this more expensive one existing to legitimize the design. And these more expensive watches can't exist in a world where someone isn't trying to constantly undercut them. So all they have at their advantage is materials that are too expensive, manufacturing techniques. But it's this interesting game of cat and mouse behind what the luxury brands say is real exclusivity, only we can do, and what less expensive things try to be. For example, this machine engraved dial here on the Parmigiani, it's actually machine engraved. Then it's colored a little bit after that. But like this level of detail, you can't get in a cheap stamp dial, right? So that's one thing. And the detail of the bezel. We looked at the Venezianico, and the bezel is similar, not as much detail.
This one is platinum.
Yeah, and again, the question is it so many more times worth it? Is the person spending over $25,000, can they feel good? Can they feel like this is something that people spending less cannot have? Or does it create a complicated dynamic where there's always a hunt for things that you absolutely can't get at lower price points? Because again, you're talking about small percentage points and refinement in a lot of instances for a lot more money. And again, I think we get it, but I wonder what this looks like to both the novice consumer as well as the enthusiast, who in the same week can read about both these watches. We didn't try to do a review of both of them in the same week. This was not intentional, but this happens a lot because there's so much of this dynamic where there's a more expensive product which kind of comes up with the design, and there's a less expensive one which is less original and often satisfying, but wouldn't be appealing if that more expensive one never existed in the first place.
Oh yeah, I think this is very interesting, what you mentioned about the cat and mouse game here. At the same time, yeah, I've been wanting to write an article about this for quite some time, but I'm just not quite sure how to articulate it best, because the way you put it is actually really good, because yes, there's this dynamic where a big brand creates a design, and then there comes somebody who undercuts them, at the 30th of a price or whatever it was. Yeah, I think exactly a 30th of the price. So you can get 30 of the other ones, so you can get every color option and everything and still have tens of thousands of dollars left in your pocket. But those would not exist without these. And these, I think, in terms of the customer, because you mentioned the consumer and what they think, at some point you reach this point in your life where wearing an $800 watch is just not an option. You don't want to enter a restaurant or a car dealership or go to a dinner or whatever, or a hotel with an $800 watch on. You just don't do that. You want something like this, and you don't care that other stuff looks like it. A lot of watches look like a Submariner, and yet people go and buy the Submariner for all kinds of reasons. So I think here Parmigiani does a reasonably okay job at explaining why this is so valuable. I think they could do a little bit more because there's a lot of work and a lot of effort that has gone into the creation of this watch. In terms of the dial, the bezel, the case, the movement, all the rest of it. I've been to the manufacturer a number of times, many years ago. And it really is incredible, and this really is what you can get, and it does have this a similar shape to what you can get for less, but you just don't get this sense of refinement. I actually saw somebody wear this exact watch at an event like maybe a month ago or something like that, and it was stunning. It really was. I was like, wow, okay, this is the guy who was wearing it. He was like dressed sharp and all the rest of it, and he was like, oh, what do you think about this watch? And I was like, wow, it really, in the right environment, I'm sorry, but it's just, you can't get that effect for $800 because the little details just don't add up to something to create this sort of impression. As impressive as the Venezianico is for $800, there's just something to be said about the effort that Parmigiani puts into this.
Yeah, and I think that's true for a lot of industries. If you just want the thing that looks like the real thing, you can go on Temu or AliExpress or whatever and get anything that looks like it. Any popular desirable style gets emulated by other brands at all sorts of price points, but people still desire that more elevated ownership, whether it's getting the real version of this or the one that just does it a little bit better. And I think anyone who's buying a watch that isn't a smartwatch, or just something for $50 at Walmart because they needed something that says the time, I think they are buying the watch for other reasons, every other reason, from how it makes them feel to the brand's heritage and all of that. And I think that's when you start getting into the more ineffable qualities. If someone just wanted an integrated bracelet sports watch in this style, there's absolutely no reason to ever buy the Parmigiani. But as David mentioned, Rolex wouldn't sell a Submariner ever if that was the case, and they have just habitually sold every single one Submariner they've ever made for years. So I think it's not so much about what the product actually is at that point, but then it becomes, once it reaches a certain level of acceptability in terms of its performance and finishing, it becomes just those incremental gains as far as how much nicer it is, the additional finishing, additional performance in terms of accuracy, the comfort of the bracelet, all of that stuff. So I think the value's there, but it takes someone who's actually, understands that the reason they're buying a watch in the first place isn't just because it tells them the time. So I think, that's probably why brands like Rolex are still doing just as well as they've ever been.
We only have time for 2 more articles. We're going over a little bit here, but there's definitely more things to talk about. But David, I want you to talk a little bit about what Bulgari is doing new. They have a new facility where they do a lot more of the artwork in-house. Bulgari is a company who is sick of those deadbeat suppliers that won't deliver on time or not at the quality they need. So they've decided they need to do more, especially the artistic stuff in-house, which, I'm being playful with it, but actually is a big deal in terms of what they can do. It means that they can deliver more sophisticated stuff. And I also think what's interesting is Bulgari is part of LVMH. Louis Vuitton is part of LVMH. They have completely different facilities that in a lot of ways do the same thing. But they recognize that having multiple facilities means that they can do more stuff, have more artisans who work for them, so they have a more diversity of talent that they can pull from, as it also makes it safer. And so it's not like there's this one centralized place where there's all these micro painters sitting in a row. It's like, today you're doing Louis Vuitton, today you're doing Daniel Roth, today you're doing Bulgari. No, there's really separations between these facilities. Yes, Louis Vuitton and Daniel Roth and Gerald Genta happen at the same place at La Fabrique du Temps. Bulgari is its own thing, but Bulgari has pretty high output. They make a lot of watches. They need to be able to do a lot of this stuff, and so that's exciting. What are some things that people need to know about this facility?
Yeah, what you say about micro artists and stuff. I've been to all of these facilities of Bulgari over the years, and we visited this place 10 years ago, and this has been remodeled so that it has that roof section, and they've expanded it considerably, and they have shut down another one and merged that with this. And so this micro artist, super high-end stuff is basically not just one room, but not much more than one room inside this building, because the output is so specific, and you can only find so many artists who can do that sort of stuff. So I think from my perspective, what is interesting here in terms of Bulgari is that it's the production for their actual watches. It's not like we have a fancy manufacturer where we paint, a precious little dial, and then everything else gets, made somewhere else that we will never show you. If you buy a Bulgari watch, even the relatively more affordable stuff, chances are that it was made here, inside these facilities of Bulgari for the watch movement manufacturer, for the case and bracelet and dial factories. It's all Bulgari. It's not stuff like Omega does, for example. You have no idea where the case or the dial of your Omega watch was made. No idea, no clue. They don't tell you, and they will never tell you. So, and why?
Oh, we have some idea.
We have some idea, yes, but they will never tell you, and we're not allowed to say because we can't prove it.
The moon, no.
The moon, of course. It's made from moonstone.
It is a foreign land, though.
Yes, that's hilarious. But here you can actually see people, like, if you scroll up a little bit, you see all those people, polishing cases and stuff. And even dials sometimes have to be polished. So it gets done in there, and not just the super high-end and precious stuff. And that, to me, is, of course it had to be done this way, because Bulgari is kind of a stubborn brand. And even though it's part of LVMH, we all know that it has always been the odd one out that has been doing its own thing. You have TAG and Zenit and Hublot, and we saw this merger in terms of design between those brands, and then there was always Bulgari doing its own thing. And otherwise they could not have done the Finissimo, and maybe you can pull one Finissimo off, but you cannot pull 9. You can't do 9 of those cases, 9 of those bracelets, 9 of those world record setting movements without having your own proper manufacturer, because it's just not possible to push a supplier to this lever. Even if you can make your own ultra thin movement, you can pull it off once, but you cannot push any supplier into producing those bracelets and those cases and those dials that meet these standards to create something, some sort of a collection that facilitates all this stuff. It had to be in-house, and it genuinely is an in-house thing. And to be clear, it has not happened this month. This news is about Bulgari merging its case, bracelet, and dial manufacturers into one place so that the know-how can be shared, which is also a unique thing in the industry as far as I know. But they've been at it for almost 20 years in terms of creating this vertically integrated manufacturing background.
It's a process where, as the years go on, as David said, we see more and more of this happening. And I wasn't wrong, but I was quite skeptical about a lot of the reasons why they were doing it. I was cynical. I said they were doing it so that they could charge more, and they were definitely charging more. But what I realized is that it wasn't that they were trying to bypass suppliers in every instance. Suppliers wouldn't do it at all. They just wouldn't do it, or they'd make them wait months and months and months and deliver the wrong thing, charge them an arm and a leg, force them to charge double what they intended for the retail price. All of these things that people accuse brands of concocting to increase prices is not really there. Now, granted, this is an environment where prices have been going up, but the reality is it allows Bulgari and the brands that do this to perform certain tasks, to offer certain things that wouldn't be practical. And this is why it's very difficult for small brands who don't have their own teams to ever come up with any of the stuff at all. So I think it's really cool, especially since we've seen the trajectory of this. Is Bulgari still a good value? I know that compared to some other brands that did this stuff, the Bulgari one wasn't cheap, but felt, I don't know, like better price. Is it still like that, or is this stuff become more stratospheric in how much it costs?
I think it varies greatly. Sometimes I'm surprised by how competitive a certain Bulgari watch is, and then sometimes I'm shocked at how expensive it is.
I know, right?
Sometimes sometimes it's just like you look at a Serpentia and you're like, oh, this looks nice, and then it's like $60,000,
or 400,000.
Or 400,000, yeah, but you can tell if it's 400. But if it's 60 or 35, then you have no idea. Or it's 15, or if it's 8, sometimes it varies. In terms of like, if you want to go super high end, you can pick up an Octo Finissimo in all gold for less than a Rolex, or basically thereabouts, and you get a varying experience and a watch that looks bonkers. If you see an all gold Octo Finissimo, it's insane. Also, to talk about something that is relatively more affordable, you can still go for something like an Octo Romo or just a regular Octo Finissimo. And I was just looking at the regular Finissimo automatic, and it's like high 10s or mid 10s or something like that. And I was thinking about, well, that's quite high. I don't remember it being that high, but of course, then it's a unique proposition. You can't go anywhere else if you want an ultra thin integrated bracelet watch. So it's all over the place in terms of Bulgari, and like any brand, you can find some stuff that is competitive and some stuff where you have to be really romanced by it to stretch that far.
Ripley, does this get you excited about Bulgari?
It does. I mean, I think for brands, whether it's Bulgari, Piaget, even Cartier, any of the brands that's really well known for a different kind of parallel industry, whether it's jewelry or Montblanc with pens, it's a little bit of an uphill battle to convince the watchmaking crowd that like we're really serious about it. Look at what Louis Vuitton, like not LVMH, but like Louis Vuitton themselves is doing. Like the perception of Louis Vuitton is they're just the widespread luxury, and we've talked about this before in other episodes. Part of what they're doing with making these, crazy heavy hitter pieces is to show the world that like really the sky's the limit. We can do whatever we want to do. We're a proper manufacturer, and I think the more that the people see that Bulgari does this, the more that it reinforces it. Anyone who handles one of their watches lets you know it's a quality product. But when it comes to brands that exist in a big parent company, whether it's LVMH, Richemont, Swatch, what have you, it can be a little bit confusing or obscure as far as what you're actually getting or who in the company's making it or what technologies are shared. So when you see that a lot of it's being made in-house, and as David mentioned, a lot of their products themselves aren't necessarily derivative of what you find with other brands. I've been getting more and more excited about Bulgari over the course of the last probably 7 years continuously. The more I see from them, the more I like them. And it went from being, oh, that's quite interesting, to now there being, quite a few watches that I'd happily own. And yet, despite being a very kind of blue chip luxury brand, they still do fun stuff like those sketch dial pieces where it's tasteful. It's elegant, it's pretty, but it's also whimsical. It's like a inverted sketch drawing of the movement. That's not like what Patek would do. So yeah, it does get me excited. And, because they're not as stuffy as a brand like Patek, I don't think they have those concerns about doing something that would quote unquote contradict themselves. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what they continue to do, now with this increased production capabilities.
We've had a lot of different discussions with Bulgari's designer, Fabrizio, and there's a superlative episode with him. There's various articles with him. I think it's a great brand to follow if you're interested in design, especially since they're so open about it. They talk about how they take certain types of elements from nature or Gerald Genta and put the Bulgari stamp on it and continue to refine. You can see an iterative process in what they do. You can see interesting themes. They both create things which are unexpected in slightly unexpected way. We've been doing this long enough to see the difference between sort of the Italian aesthetic when it comes to this versus the French versus the Swiss versus the Japanese. There are all these slight differences. So on the outside, it might be like, well, they're all doing miniature painting, and they're all doing enameling, and they're all doing engraving, and they're all doing gem setting. These are just various techniques to create a whole variety of art. And Bulgari has just been doing it so long; they know it. You know what I mean? There's a comfort associated with some of these, really lavish pieces. It's actually more difficult for them to come up with like a good $6,000 watch than it is a good $60,000 watch, right? Like they figured a lot of it out. So. So that is the aBlogtoWatch look inside this new facility for Bulgari, and you can see more of that. Let's go to our final article today. I think last week or so we were musing on Ripley wearing the outfit that was associated with this article. This is his hands-on article with the Tudor Pelagos FXD Chrono Cycling Edition. And I guess you'll talk a little bit more about being on an actual bicycle and doing some bicycling stuff like this. This is a modification of the standard Tudor Black Bay Chrono. It's got some different features that Ripley will talk about, but I guess the idea is that this is supposed to be tied to cycling, a sport that Tudor supports in a variety of ways. I wasn't able to be there on a bike, but Ripley, you were. Tell us about Tudor and cycling, and specifically this watch.
Well, Tudor's got their own cycling team, the Tudor Pro Cycling Team. But this is kind of an interesting watch. They have the Black Bay, which is just increasingly nebulous. And then they had the Pelagos, which for years kind of seemed a little bit neglected. It debuted as a titanium, thoroughly modern titanium diver. And then it just kind of stayed that way. And, now they've got the FXD and the 39. And now the FXD, specifically, the Pelagos is now not just a dive watch, it's kind of a multi-purpose contemporary sports watch collection. And the FXD specifically has been kind of taking these other sports specific forms. So while the Pelagos 39 and the standard Pelagos are standard dive watches, you get the duo of Alinghi FXD models, which are for regatta racing. You get the FXD cycling edition, which is for bike racing, and then you have the military versions that they do as well, including the new GMT that was just released a little while ago. But I think it's interesting that they're doing this because part of Tudor's DNA and Rolex as well was creating these tool watches. And as we started the show by mentioning, the concept of a tool watch in 2024, almost 2025, when we're having this conversation, doesn't quite have the same. It doesn't look the same anymore as it once did. And so when brands are making a contemporary tool watch, you're not just designing it for being the most practical tool possible. So in this regard, I'd almost consider this to be the cycling equivalent of a contemporary mechanical dive watch. Everyone is going to use a dive computer if they're going to be diving or doing anything meaningful. We have them. They do so much more than any mechanical timepiece. And yet people like the mechanical dive watches because they're either a good backup or that thing to wear when they don't necessarily need to be tracking their bottom time and they're just messing around on vacation in some super shallow water on their friend's boat. And so that when the rest of the time when they're not diving, they can telegraph to the world that they're interested in diving by wearing a dive watch. And so this is kind of the cycling themed version. Look how small that tachymeter scale is. Using that, let alone the fact you have to ride at a constant speed to really use it, you're not going to be really doing that on a bike. And then when you compare it, I mentioned this in the article, I had asked an Olympian cyclist, what the role of watches in professional cycling were and how this kind of fits into it. And it really isn't, you're never going to be able to recreate the performance metrics that can be extracted from a smartwatch. And that's not the point of a mechanical cycling watch. It's really supposed to be something that can exist within that world, allude to it, have features that have, some theoretical relevance in it. But this isn't something to replace an Apple Watch or a Garmin in any type of capacity, in the same way that a Submariner is not a replacement for a dive computer. So people who gripe about the functionality, for sure, yeah, I wouldn't try to measure my average speed, but as a watch, it's a carbon composite fixed lug Pelagos with a weird tachymeter bezel. That's just cool in my opinion.
So let's ask a basic question here. This is a material that, as far as I know, Tudor hasn't used before in other cases.
Only on the other FXD chrono, which was the Alinghi Red Bull yacht racing one.
Okay, so this is the second time they've done this. I may have seen that watch briefly. I don't think I spent a lot of time with it. I definitely didn't think too much about it. Tudor is a company that is not going to use a material unless they're absolutely confident that it looks good, is going to age well. For the money, Tudor does really good case finishing with metal. Carbon is not just one material because it's composite and there's different formulations. So that means Tudor is not going to use the exact same formulation as all the other ones. As we know, a lot of companies have created trade names around theirs because they have a proprietary blend, as simple as that blend might be, or minorly different than other ones. How does Tudor do a carbon case? Is it impressive? Does it look like the rest? Tell me about that.
It's actually quite heavy for what you'd expect it. So the movement in this watch is the same movement that you're going to find in like a Black Bay Chrono.
Which is a heavy movement.
It's a heavy movement. It's large. It's machined brass plated parts in there. So it's fundamentally a heavy movement. But just like other Pelagos models, this is a multi-component case. So the titanium Pelagos models used stainless steel case backs and stainless steel threads for the crown tubes. And I believe that's done to prevent galling, which titanium is more susceptible to that, and probably easier because they don't need to really machine different metals for the case backs. This one, it's all the metal on it is plated black. The crown is titanium, pushers are titanium, but the case back has a different appearance. And so I'd imagine that the case back is steel just like any other Pelagos model, and just like any other carbon cased watch, it uses a metal internal cylinder to house the movement and the threaded junctures and all of that, and then the carbon composite forms the rest of the exterior case. It's carbon doesn't, unless they have a really exotic pattern and it's intricately cut and brushed, like you get on some of the really high-end luxury manufacturers, carbon doesn't exude that same sense of luxury as finely finished metal. But this feels very well crafted and solid and intentional, which is what you hope for in most carbon composite watches. So it doesn't feel luxurious per se, but it does feel very well built and put together, which I would say applies to all of the Pelagos models, which are titanium, and they feel very nice, but they don't feel luxurious in the same way that like a heavy steel or even gold dive watch does.
It's not a blingy watch.
No, it's not blingy. It feels very nice, but like If you held this up, if you showed this to your average person next to a standard Black Bay chrono and said, what's the nicer watch? No one would pick this. Most people would look at it and be like, oh, the plastic thing? No, it's the other one.
Now, another question, and I think it's important to say that there's a lot of overlap between appreciation of bicycles and watches. Both of them, at least traditionally, are mechanical. There's sort of this interaction between user and machine that can be very satisfying. It's just a lot of overlap. Not everyone that likes bikes likes watches and vice versa. But again, there's a lot of overlap, similar to cars. The problem is it's been very difficult to combine these worlds. Not only is it difficult to make mechanical watches that are somehow useful in a biking environment, but it's very difficult to put aesthetic elements. Yes, there's a lot of shared materials, but I have very rarely seen bike world elements on a watch that look good as a watch. There's what do? You put the gear as the bezel. I mean, I don't know what to do. There's not individually bike components aren't as pretty as the whole thing itself, right? So respond to these statements, David.
Yeah, I think it's more about the test for me, whether or not it can endure all the shocks and all the vibrations and stuff. A friend of mine has a watch workshop where people can take sometimes high-end watches and whatever in for servicing, and they can always tell if it's a watch that's been worn on a bike or a scooter or something like that. It's just such a peculiar type of wear that all those vibrations and shocks, once the watch is regularly exposed to those, impose on a watch, and especially on the movement. They can just take it apart and they know for a fact that it was regularly worn on a bike, motorbike or whatever. And so I would love to hear from Tudor how this watch is more resistant to those, and whether or not I have to take it in for a service every 2 years, or whether the rotor is going to be loose, or something's going to fall apart, or something like that. So it's all nice and well that they put a carbon case on it, but that's because they have a supplier for carbon cases who's figured out how to make a carbon case for all kinds of purposes. It's not a case that I'm worried about. If it were a steel case or a titanium case or whatever else, I would be just as relaxed about wearing it on a bike. As long as it's lightweight and dense rather than shatters, I would be fine. Tell me about the movement and stretch and push the limits of those in terms of these vibrations. I think either these movements are all very resistant to all of those things, which I seriously doubt, or it's just something that we turn a blind eye to, which is, again, not something. Because if it's meant to be worn on a bike with that ridiculous tachymeter scale that is unreadable, even now, if I were sitting here at my desk, I couldn't use it, let alone on a bike, do something more that is not just design and not just an off-the-shelf component from a supplier.
Ripley?
Yeah, I think a lot of the aesthetic things you can carry over end up getting real gimmicky real quick. And we see the same thing with automotive cars, where it's like, oh, yay, another tire print rubber strap. You don't need the bike print strap. You don't need the bike chain bracelet. All of these are going to look atrocious. So like David mentioned, I think making it from a functional perspective, well suited for its environment is kind of the name of the game. Dive watches have it a bit easier. You just need a legibility, good water resistance. Don't totally blow it when it comes to ergonomics and usability, like things like the bezel. And most people are going to say that's fine for it. Once you start entering more specialized sports like biking or anything that's going to subject it to weird amounts of wear or G-force, you start getting into those other proprietary systems like Richard Mille does, where it's like we suspended the whole movement in on this these pulley things, and we have this other mechanism that locks the rotor so that it doesn't move when you're playing golf or fighting lions or whatever they're doing next. And so I think this watch succeeds at what it's supposed to do, which is to be a watch that alludes to biking and can remind someone of biking and can sort of exist in that world and aesthetically fit in with the other carbon fiber stuff. I personally, if I was designing a watch for cycling, I would want it to have all of the cool tech to make it well suited for cycling. But at that point, we're not talking Tudor prices, we're talking RM prices, and that's $10, 100 times what this is currently priced at. So I understand they're kind of confined from a design perspective, but maybe some type of shock dampener around the movement, especially since they have the flexibility of having both the carbon case and the internal metal container. Maybe something along those lines might be would have been nice to see, but this is the first one that they've done. I can't think of any other cycling watches from a big old Swiss brand like this. So I think the concept's still in its infancy, and it'll be interesting to see if they end up doing another one of these.
I mean, the watch industry again has not been new to the bike world. Who was it? Longines, I think, that sponsored the Tour de France for like a long. Or was it Tissot? Sorry, Tissot.
Tissot, yeah.
Yeah, for a long time. I knew it was this watch group. Tag Heuer, I think, has done some cycling things as well. All these T brands and cycling. I don't know what that is.
Looks like handlebars.
Yeah, there you go. There's something to it. There's going to be a designer or creative person out there who's going to figure it out a little bit better. I think this is a cool watch, but like, if I just saw it on someone's wrist, nothing about it says, "Oh, that's cycling right there." Like nothing about that. And on a tangent, if you vote for me, I'll make sure that the tachymeter is abolished. I'd say that the world has enough tachymeters. All the tachymeters that need to be made have been made, and then some. And I think we can just abolish the tachymeter. So that if you vote for me, it's gone. I promise you that.
It's gone.
Well, why? I think the principle of the tachymeter is very useful. I think the fact that we have them calibrated to speeds of 400 miles an hour, sir, what are you doing with your Daytona? Like, I think we need to just recalibrate the tachymeter to something relevant, like the rate that like water boils or like traffic lights change or something. Like I'm not calculating average speed, but the principle of a tachymeter to calculate units over time, very useful. I think we just need to adapt it to something like burger eating or the rate that petrol fills from the gas pump or something like that. I think that could be an interesting way of doing it. The urban driver's watch. Yeah, let me know how long the gas rate I'm flowing into my Honda.
Remember, it's a danger scale. That's the appeal. Going back to the earlier conversation we had about the activities that watch brands make timepieces for, the idea that you're going 400 miles an hour and that you need to measure it, that's the dream. It's just so antiquated because if you're doing that, this would be the last tool you use to calculate your actual speed. So we just need to think about a new danger scale. Again, going back to April Fools. With the Hublot depleted uranium watch, the chronograph on there was designed to tell you how long you were allowed to be exposed. Timer. Yeah, before you would get radiation damage. Danger. It has to be a danger scale. That's all we're going to talk about in this show. You can think about your own danger scales. Rather than talk about the phone number, which I've already forgotten, though the song is somehow still stuck in my head. Kudos to the composer. Podcast at aBlogtoWatch.com to reach out. Listen to our other show, which is the Superlative Podcast, where I do interviews. Go to the aBlogtoWatch store and have a good rest of the year, even though we will be back again before 2025. I can assure you of that. Nothing will stop this horological conversation. Gentlemen, I will let you say your goodbyes, and to everyone, thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Catch you next week.
Thanks for listening to the aBlogtoWatch weekly podcast. Catch you later.